No. Buenos días. I would start in Spanish saying bienvenidos. In Catalan is benvinguts, and in English, of course, as you know, is welcome. Welcome to the Seafood Futures Forum 2022. It's been both live here in Barcelona at the Seafood Expo Global and also being broadcasted around the world. I'm Laura Rodriguez, Program Director of MSC here in Spain and in Portugal, and it's really wonderful to see so many of you here today, particularly in my home country after such a long time. Gracias por venir. Thanks a lot for coming. It's really a pleasure to see you here today. We have a full agenda lined up for you today. Let me show. We will start with an update from Rupert Howes, the MSC Chief Executive, and the MSC Chief Program Officer, Nicolas Guichoux. Then we are delighted to have Justin Kim, former CEO of Sainsbury in the UK and renowned businessman, who will stay with us to present a keynote on the role of businesses in driving change. Then we will have leaders from Lidl Spain, Echebastar, the International Union of Conservation of Nature, IUCN, who will join Rupert and Justin on stage with our moderator, Natasja van den Berg. They will debate the role of business in safeguarding the ocean over the next 8 years. And to conclude, there will be an opportunity for you all to raise questions to our panel, either online or in person. And let me explain how this will work. If you are in the room, you can get logged in using the Wi-Fi. You can see the codes here in the screen. And there will be opportunities to raise questions using Slido. You can start from now raising your questions, but for the people in the room, you will be able also to raise your hands in the Q&A session. We also invite you to share and follow up on social media using the hashtag, which is not easy for me to say, is SFF2022. In Spanish, SFF 2022. And before handing over to Rupert Howes, Chief Executive of the MSC, we have a short video address to share with you to set the scenes for today's discussion. And we are really delighted that Peter Thompson, the United Nations Special Envoy for the Ocean, is able to share this message to you.
Hello, I'm Peter Thompson, the United Nations Secretary General's Special Envoy for the Ocean. And since 2017, I've been leading the UN's efforts to achieve the conservation and sustainable use of the ocean's resources. Thank you for the opportunity of addressing you at the MSC's Seafood Futures Forum and the chance to commend your good efforts for worldwide action to protect the ocean's health. I'm sure I don't need to tell you how wonderful the ocean is. Covering over 90% of the habitable space of our planet. It's home to up to 10 million marine species, from tiny krill to the enormous blue whale. It regulates our climate and sustains the health and prosperity of people worldwide. More than 39 million people are employed directly through wild fishing. More than 3 billion rely on seafood as a primary source of protein. If we take care of the ocean, it will take care of us. But human pressure on the ocean is increasing at rapid and unsustainable rates. Climate change, pollution, overfishing, and habitat destruction are pushing ocean ecosystems closer and closer to tipping points. A third of the ocean's fish stocks are overfished, compared with 10% in 1974. With global demand for fish and aquatic foods expected to double by 2050, we must do much more to safeguard the ocean's resources for the security of future generations. It is thus that fishing sustainably is an essential demand. Governments worldwide have recognized this urgency. In 2015, member states of the United Nations universally adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity, people and planet, for now and into the future. At the agenda's heart are 17 Sustainable Development Goals. The 14th of these, SDG 14, includes a target to end overfishing by 2020. While this deadline has now passed, 8 years remain for SDG 14 to deliver its targets in full, all within this, the UN Decade of Ocean Science. The seafood industry has a huge role to play in meeting this goal. I recognize your efforts to date and thank you for being part of these proactive discussions today. We can see that business commitments are driving change on an international scale. By investing in sustainable fishing and buying only sustainable seafood, you can create a chain reaction to safeguard the ocean. You have the ability to make governments pay attention to the demand for sustainable fishing and the need for regulation to truly support a sustainable seafood market. And you empower consumers to make the right choices when buying seafood. There can be no healthy planet without a healthy ocean. And only by acting together can we hope to safeguard this blue planet for the future enjoyment of our species. Thank you for being part of this global effort to conserve the resources of the ocean and thereby the health of the single greatest element of our global commons, the mighty ocean, deep and wide.
Bienvenidos. Let me extend my welcome as well. It's fantastic. We have a sellout event nearly. I think 300 or so registered to be here in person in Barcelona, another 500 online, and I gather it's being live streamed in China. So a particular warm welcome as well to our Chinese colleagues and partners who couldn't make it here. Very, very powerful presentation from Peter Thompson there. The theme for today is 8 years to save our ocean and the power of business. And Peter's video clearly articulates what we all feel, that the oceans really are in trouble. There is a crisis, and we have 8 years aligned to the SDGs to try and turn this around and deliver the targets of sustainable oceans and sustainable fishing. The theme also very much speaks to the Marine Stewardship Council. It's quite remarkable. 25 years ago, the MSC was founded to create a market-based mechanism, a program that could connect businesses and consumers with producers, using the power of the market to incentivize, recognize, and reward sustainable fishing. And this fishery, this is the image from the South African hake fishery, to me personifies what MSC is trying to do. We run a voluntary certification and labelling program based on science and evidence. The South African hake fishery voluntarily entered the program. Multi-stakeholders got involved, RSPB, WWF South Africa, government regulators all got involved. And it turned out there wasn't one stock of hake, there was two. One was overfished. 14,000 seabirds were being killed every year. And over a period of time, working with the industry, all of those problems were fixed. Both stocks are now operating at MSY. The fishery has entered its fourth cycle of certification. Bird bycatch from simple torii lines being put on the warps has reduced bird bycatch by 95% and for wandering albatross by 99%. And importantly, the industry estimates that without MSC certification, the net present value would be 35% below. MSC certification helped them get access to new markets and better prices. So it really is good for the environment, good for consumers, and good for business. 25 years on of partnership and progress, working with all of you, with the fishing industry, with NGOs, with consumers, This is where we are. Obviously, my short introduction, the warm-up act for Nicolas Guichoux, who will be getting into more detail on progress. This is the sort of headlines. 19% of wild capture fisheries are now certified. Over 500 fisheries, but critically, over 2,000 documented improvements. And the retail sales value now is approaching $13 billion. It is truly a global endeavour. Let's get to the next slide. I have no time to run through 25 years of progress, but I wanted to just highlight a couple of examples to sort of illustrate what we're trying to do. This year is the 10th anniversary of the Western Australian States Government's commitment to give the opportunity of all of their fisheries, 50 fisheries in total, to go through an MSC pre-assessment, and for those who wanted to go on to have a full assessment, to pay for that. The government put up $15 million. Fisheries have come forward, and now, 10 years later, there's 11 fisheries certified, 4 in full assessment, representing over 90% of the state's fisheries by value. To me, it's a great example of another sort of evolution from the power of business, but also the power and necessity of government as well. Government working with business, with the retailers in Australia and elsewhere, and critically, obviously, with the fishing industry to achieve this result. The other highlight I wanted to mention was MSC's Ocean Stewardship Fund. I launched this at the Bali Our Ocean Conference in 2018. This is a funding mechanism we use to try and build a pathway to sustainability, to help fisheries who aren't ready to enter into full assessment to get some of the data, to overcome some of the obstacles that they might need to overcome to enable them to enter full assessment. Just last week, we gave away $1 million to 22 projects. Much of this money goes to small-scale fisheries in the Global South, but we also fund researchers, academics, to get new knowledge that will benefit the whole industry. And again, one quick example, this is a looming eye buoy, and this is a partnership project in Iceland with the Icelandic lumpfish fishery, RSPB, Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, and also BirdLife Iceland. And this device is obviously designed to scare away birds and help that fishery close down a condition to reduce bird bycatch. But it's just one of many examples of MSC working in partnership, and in this case, leveraging money from sustainable consumption by hypothecating an element of the logo income we generate to use it to subsidize scaling up of sustainable production. As Peter so eloquently put it, our oceans are in trouble. They are the lungs of the world. Every second breath, they absorb 93% of the excess heat we generate, a quarter of the carbon dioxide. Peter talked about the demand for seafood and aquatic products doubling by 2050. It is imperative that we accelerate what we do to deliver the SDGs to operate within ecological limits. Climate change is existential. The IPCC report a few years ago on the cryosphere talked about 1.5 degree warming killing 90% of warm water reefs. At 2 degrees, they've all gone. Barrier reef, gone. All warm tropical reefs, gone. Critically important ecosystems for fish breeding grounds. And at the moment, if we deliver our nationally declared commitments under Paris, I think we're heading for a 3 degree warmer world. This context is what is informing MSC's next strategic plan. My board of trustees will be discussing this in June of this year. And our plan is going to be very much based on building on the success of working with all of you for the last quarter of a century to scale the solutions that we're trying to deliver with you to make a meaningful contribution to the delivery of the Sustainable Development Goals. We will be very recognizable. At our hearts, we are a certification and labeling program. We will maintain a standard. We'll launch our new fisheries standards review, but we want to work more with you in scaling solutions to deliver what is required. At the end of the day, we are about people, food, and the ocean. I'm very much looking forward to the panel discussion, but we'll hand over to Nicolas Guichoux now, our Chief Programme Officer. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Rupert. I'm really, really glad to be back with you all. So before we dive into the theme of this forum to discuss the role of business in saving the oceans, I'd like to take 15 minutes to update you on the MSC's work, share our latest insights and market trends, and how they connect with this theme. So much has happened in the past 2 years. These are really just highlights, so please to come to meet us on the booth if you'd like to have more discussion or even after this event. So, as Rupert mentioned, we now have 19% of global marine catch engaged in the program, and these catch are really made all over the globe. From this map, you can see that the MSC is truly a global program. We had many developments in fisheries this past couple of years, and I'd just like to name a few. In the North Atlantic, the Faroe Islands did particularly well with 3 new fisheries certified for capelin, cod, and haddock. We also witnessed increased engagement in the developing countries and with small-scale fisheries. You've heard about South African hake already, but their neighbor in Namibia became the second whitefish fishery in Africa to get certified. And for South Africa, I think that was the 3rd recertification. We also welcomed the 3rd Indonesia tuna fishery following very close collaboration with the Indonesian government. This has been a catalyst for change on the water, and this added also 11,000 tons of sustainable yellowfin and skipjack tuna. Another first was this time in the Philippines, where a small-scale fishers organization catching yellowfin tuna with handline became the first certified fishery in this beautiful country. Finally, to our Chinese audience, following us, we'd like to congratulate the Yalu Estuary Manila clam fishery in the China Yellow Sea, which achieved MSC following an extensive multi-stakeholder improvement project. And it's the first clam fishery in China to do so. Demand for MSC certified fish is what really incentivizes fisheries the most to make environmental improvement to meet the MSC standard. It is therefore good news that the sales of MSC label products in the retail sector globally have been very strong under COVID, especially in 2021 as consumers were stockpiling products at home. We are also forecasting a slight increase for 21-22 as people returning to more normal purchasing habits. At regional level, we reported very strong growth in South Europe, 30% on average, and particularly high in Spain and Italy. And North America also saw a lot of growth with 32%. Really all of that due to the increasing popularity of the MSC program in these countries. Sales have plateaued or decreased in some North European markets and in Japan, as they have been hit by the delisting of Atlantic mackerel and herring products due to fishery suspensions from the program. And this despite strong growth in tuna labeling, but I'll come back to that in a minute in more details. The last couple of years has also witnessed a significant increase in labeled long shelf life products such as frozen food, 15% on average, ready meals, 25% growth, surimi, 26%, pet food goods, 16%. We really like our pets at MSC. And especially food to go, such as sandwich, with 57% growth. Canned seafood, really, in long shelf life product was the exception with -2%, but again, due to the loss of mackerel and herring that are key species used in canned seafood. The pandemic led to a drop in food service sales, down 7%, wet fish at fish counters down 10%, and chilled products, down 6%. We observed some key trends and challenges in the past 2 years, as well as new commitment from businesses. We have seen a particularly strong growth for sustainable tuna. Consumer and retailer demand, together with more eco-friendly fishing operations, have resulted in a rapid shift in the way tuna is caught globally. With 66 tuna fisheries now MSC certified, about half of the global catch of major commercial tuna species is either certified or in assessment. 2021 was a year of rapid growth for labeled tuna, with a 50% increase in volume. That really puts global sales on course to reach 110,000 tons. For 21-22, we're forecasting further 15% growth to reach over 126,000 metric tons. The significant growth in both MSC certified fisheries and labeled product is being driven by new and ongoing commitments to use the MSC label on tuna product. Some of the brands making these commitments are shown on these slides. I don't really have time to go through all of these, but just a few examples. All private label tuna products sold by Albert Heijn in the Netherlands now carry the MSC label. Lidl Germany launched their own private label tuna brand in 21 to include almost entirely certified MSC fish. In March 21, Tesco, the UK's largest retailer, committed to achieve 100% MSC certification across its tuna range by 2025. And in June 2020, Walmart US announced that it would source all canned tuna in its great value range from either MSC certified fisheries or those actively working towards certification by 2025. However, this progress could be undermined if international governance of regional fisheries management organization, RFMOs, for tuna failed to adopt long-term strategies to ensure the continued health of tuna stock. It is particularly important in the Western Central Pacific that is home to more than half of the world's skipjack tuna. Despite the region's very strong track record in sustainable fishing, long-term certification will require the 26 nations responsible for tuna fishing in the region to agree to rules aimed at ensuring stocks never become overfished. We are urging members of the Western Pacific Fishery Commission to support the adoption of these rules to ensure the long-term health of this vital tuna stock, but also the incredible commitments made by retailers and consumers to choose tuna with the highest assurance of sustainability. In a different ocean, and with different species, the challenge is even bigger for Northeast Atlantic mackerel, Atlanto-Scandian herring, and blue whiting. For more than a decade, the sum of their quotas has exceeded scientific advice, resulting in an overall downward trend in their stocks and loss of the MSC certification. These stocks represent one of the largest fish populations in Europe and are fished by some of the richest nations in the world. On this slide, you see the volume of MSC labeled product dropping by 37 tons last year because of the suspension. Quota this year again for these fisheries have been set above scientific advice. Consistently overshooting them puts the health of the oceans, economies, and livelihoods in jeopardy. So we welcome major retailers and seafood businesses' call made last year to set the quotas in line with scientific advice to ensure long-term viability of these species. Many of the signatories said they would reevaluate their sourcing policies if the current unsustainable situation continue. While political talks continue, some retailers and seafood companies decided indeed to look for alternatives. They have started to source jack mackerel from Chile, a species that is not traditionally used in European canned product. German seafood brand Follow Food is about to launch canned Chilean jack mackerel in oil in Germany. Migros in Switzerland, Deleuze in Belgium, and Albert Heijn in Holland have all recently started to sell Chilean jack mackerel as a sustainable alternative to Northeast Atlantic mackerel. I mentioned earlier that we observed a very strong growth of eco-labeled frozen product. MSC certified whitefish is a common ingredient in frozen seafood. Conagra Brands has committed to sourcing 100% of its whitefish from MSC to promote the sustainability of their Mrs. Paul's and Van de Kamp's product. These are two of the main frozen seafood brands sold in retail in the US. One of the most notable commitments to sustainable whitefish has been that of Nomad Foods, owners of the Bird's Eye, Findus, and Iglo brands in Europe. In fact, Iglo Portugal recently achieved 100% MSC sustainable seafood sourced, an achievement of which they are rightly very proud. And they are the first company in the Iberian regions to achieve this impressive milestone. Nomad Foods was also one of the driving forces behind the recent certification of the Namibian hake. Once a picture of overfishing, Namibia's hake sector is being transformed. It's taking 3 decades of collaboration between government and industry to make an impact. Stocks have doubled in size, and there have been significant commitment to sustainability. And it's a very parallel story to South African hake that Rupert mentioned in his presentation. And with the current concern of many seafood companies over their ability to maintain sourcing whitefish from Russia because of the events that we know, there is potential to source alternative MSC certified whitefish all around the globe. But as always, the key question is, do consumers really care? Every 2 years, we commission the independent research agency GlobeScan to conduct a survey of consumer perception of seafood. It's the biggest of its kind in the world. This year's survey was conducted in a total of 23 markets with just over 25,000 respondents. We'd like to share some early results to this survey with you now. The good news is that MSC continues to grow its profile and trust globally, and this despite the unprecedented disruption of the pandemic. The picture overall in 22 is positive. Recognition of the label, trust, and likelihood to recommend have all slightly increased, and about 78% of consumers trust the MSC label. Here's my, here it is. We also ask consumers what they think the main threats for oceans are. Pollution and overfishing remain for them the most worrying challenges facing oceans. There has been a slight dip in concern about overfishing, but it remains the second most concerning issue facing the oceans after pollution. There is also growing public concern about rising sea levels and climate change. Give you a bit of time to look at that. Finally, when we ask consumers what were the groups or institutions which contribute to protect the world's oceans environment, they place independent certification third after NGOs and scientists. There has been a particularly good increase in the perceived positive impact of independent certification organizations, and to be noted of the fishing industry and large companies. And these results are particularly relevant for the theme of our discussion today on the role of businesses in driving changes in our oceans. So I'd like now to introduce our keynote speaker, Justin King. Justin's work with the MSC goes back many, many years, and especially when he was at the head of Sainsbury's. And Sainsbury's was one of the first large retailers in the world to support the work we do. So we're very pleased to welcome José. Thank you very much. Thank you, Justin. 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 Thank you
Thank you, Nicola, and good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Actually, how good's English of our guys at the back? Could you put that last slide back up? Is there any chance of that? Oh, fantastic. I haven't seen that slide before this talk. Before I get started, in a way, to my mind, quite a depressing slide, or at least what it does is shape the size of the challenge that we collectively have. Only a quarter of consumers think they can make a difference. That's how I read that slide. That's an incredible challenge. And I've spent most of my working life in shops, and only 1 in 6 consumers think we're part of the solution, although I suspect they think we're part of the problem, which is kind of the point. So thank you. I think that's an incredibly powerful slide. As you heard from Nicola, my timeline with MSC goes back about 20 years. I was head of food at Marks & Spencer's 20 odd years ago, and then I moved to Sainsbury's. And I think the MSP has been in my working life for the whole of Rupert's time there, actually. I think we met probably in his first few months, which would have been the early days of my time at Sainsbury's. And I guess what that slide tells us, and where I want to start, is the irony of the situation that we find ourselves in. So much achieved over the last 25 years, and yet so much more to achieve in a, frankly, much shorter time period. We may return to that. And that's a bitter irony when you see that data that most consumers don't think they're part of the solution, and clearly they must be. I used to have a boss. He had this rather awkward line, but I think it was a powerful one. He used to say, no change is not an option. No change is not an option. What we have been doing clearly is not adequate. It's clearly not enough. We are going to have to change the narrative. Now, this morning I am literally, as I just demonstrated with the AV guys, an Englishman abroad. I have the command, I think, of the English language, but none other. And one of the things that English people do when they're abroad, this may be more appreciated by those in the audience who are not English, is that when we're not understood, what we do is we speak slightly slower, slightly more loudly, get slightly more irritated, and assume that that's going to help. And it never does. We have to change the language, just like an Englishman abroad. If we just speak more slowly, more loudly, and slightly more irritated, we aren't going to get this done. So for the purposes of this conversation, I have 5, I guess, rhetorical questions to pose. I'm not sure I'll necessarily answer them that well, and they are as follows. Firstly, I want to touch on the role of business versus government. It's a constant tension in my working life, at least. Secondly, I want to talk about collaboration versus competition, the 2 C words, if you like, of this, because I, to some extent, I think I have a contrary view in that space. Thirdly, I want to touch on the dynamic between celebrating success and punishing failure, if I can call it that, because I think it's important to this conversation and motivating business. Fourthly, I want to talk about the idea that consumers lead on this, and in fact, what I would argue is almost the excuse of business, that they're only doing what consumers demand of them. And finally, and in the context of the theme of today, 8 years to save the oceans, I want to talk about big versus small targets and how those impact on businesses and consumers. So starting with that first, the role of business versus the role of government. Look, we can be in no doubt at all that the business of fishing has political traction. Most Brits have forgotten something quite big happened 6 years ago. We're going to continue to remember it for generations to come. We voted for Brexit to leave Europe. And there was a little spat in the middle of Brexit around fisheries. It involved Nigel Farage and others sailing a fishing boat up the Thames. And fishing has commanded in the UK, partly because of our maritime heritage, a much bigger political weight than any rational assessment of its economic impact in our country or social impact in our country demands. And you saw that in that Brexit debate. And the truly bitter irony of that is that the vast majority of people that worked in fisheries, surveys show, voted for Brexit. And there are few industries that have been harder and more adversely hit than by that Brexit. It shows you how the narrative around this can really be contradictory and ultimately get a currency way beyond its worth. Now that actually, I think, should fill us with some hope and some ambition, because we have to somehow grasp that in a positive way rather than obviously the very negative example I quoted there in Brexit. And something that I always say to politicians, it doesn't make you popular as a business person when you say this, is that businesses are more democratic than most democracies. Most of our politicians, as Macron demonstrated just last weekend, only have to get a vote at a moment in time, typically in our democratic systems every 4th or 5th year. Businesses get a vote pretty much every week. It's a vote made with the wallet. And actually, as we know, the vote that people make with a wallet, they view as much more valuable, sadly, in our liberal democracies than the vote that they do for politicians. And that's a powerful tool that we have at our disposal, and we should never forget that. And that currency matters in politics. I sat in the back of the car 20-odd years ago with a politician called Richard Cabourn. He was the sports minister in the UK. On another passion of mine, I profoundly believe sport transforms young lives more than anything else, and Sainsbury's campaigned on that issue. And he turned to me in the back of the car as the government sports minister and said, "Justin, do you know what? I think you've made more difference to sport in schools than I have." And momentarily I felt great, and then I felt deeply depressed, because I thought he had all the levers of power and that the difference I made was de minimis. But it made me realise that that dynamic was something that I could use, and through it, I think we influenced very significantly government policy on sport in schools. And if you doubt that, look back to COP26 in Glasgow. Now, this may be lost on those of you that are not residents of the UK, but the entire narrative, as I saw it, around COP26 in the UK for several months in the run-up to it, was what business was going to do. Now, depressingly, at least from my perspective, I felt that was the narrative because government were trying to avoid its responsibilities, so it likes loading them on business. But nonetheless, I thought that was powerful and compelling. The COP series of conferences is not something I've previously been involved or engaged in, so it was my first experience of seeing that run-up. But I thought that was a powerful reminder of the role of business. And there's a very, I don't know if you know it, but it's a J.K. Galbraith quote where he says the challenge of politics is the choice between the disastrous and the unpalatable. Now, I'm not sure I necessarily agree with that quote, because I think most politicians choose the third option, which is to kick the can down the road. I think it's the kind of not on my watch option. And this is a classic not on my watch issue. And I think that ultimately businesses do have longer time horizons. You will never have a chief exec stand up in front of you and say, you know, shareholders don't have short-term horizons. They do, particularly if you're a public company. Shares can be traded on a daily basis. But increasingly, capital, and we'll come back to capital in a second, is asking long-term sustainable questions about the businesses in which they invest. And increasingly businesses, certainly those that trade on their shares on public markets, have to show that they are considering those long-term risks. And the accounting profession in the UK, for example, is under incredible pressure to force businesses to articulate clearly what their long-term sustainability issues are. And that pressure will make a difference to how businesses behave. And for those of you that work to influence business, I'd encourage you to think about a simple idea. Businesses really make a very simple decision on these types of issues. Do we lead? Do we run with the pack? Or do we follow? Do the bare minimum necessary to get away with it? And the reason that I, in my time at M&S and Sainsbury's, had this long relationship with the MSC is that we took a conscious decision that this was an issue on which we were going to lead. And that's how, you know, it came to pass, as it were. So that brings me to collaboration versus competition. So the C word that I think most people in this audience like is collaboration. The C word that I like is competition. It is the most powerful force invented in our modern capitalist systems within broadly liberal democracies. Collaboration is not a particularly powerful force. It's necessary, but it is certainly not sufficient. And if we are to crack this, we need to bring the force of competition to bear on the issue, I would suggest. I used to have this attitude at Sainsbury's. It's, I think, a Groucho Marx quote: "I don't want to be a member of any club that wants me as a member." And the reason for that is that I always felt that the clubs that people invited to be members of were always in pursuit of some kind of lowest common denominator that they could get everyone to agree to, and in particular wanted to wrap themselves in my clothes, which I thought were better and more distinct. Why would I want to sit in a room with someone that didn't really share my values, allowing them to claim that they did? And that's why I'm super wary of collaboration, because I think collaboration tends to a lower bar, tends to a lower outcome. Competition, however, does quite the opposite. And you can be in no doubt, surely you can be in no doubt, that capital follows competition. Look at the money that is currently in pursuit of the idea of super fast grocery deliveries. By almost any rational assessment, it is a ludicrous amount of money in pursuit of failure, in very large part. Indeed, I heard the CEO of Getir in the UK, the son of the founder of that business, when asked the question how he thought the market would develop, he said, in 5 years' time, there will only be 1 or 2 of us, which I thought was a candid confession. The more candid confession, however, was he was asked whether he would be one of those 2. And he said, of course. And the questioner said, why? And he said, because I've got more money. He didn't say, because I've got the better idea. He didn't say, because I do more for consumers. He said, I've got more money. So if you doubt how you get this done, having more money is a really important part of the equation. And competition is at the heart of how you have more money. People will invest if they believe they can gain long-term, sustainable, profitable, competitive advantage. And I encourage you strongly to think about that idea. So my third question to pose was celebrate versus punish. And this is where I'm going to, once again, and I probably smacked him 20 times in my working life, smack Rupert. Because actually how I first came across him personally was we had taken this decision. We were, as Nicola kindly said, one of the first retailers in the world to adopt MSC certification. And when we did, it passed almost without note. At least that's what we felt in Sainsbury's. It was tucked away in the top pocket by the MSC. That's a good start. And then a year or so later, Morrison's, one of my competitors, who I didn't think did quite as good a job on the turf, made one small announcement, which the MSC celebrated like the return of the prodigal son. And the technical term is that pissed me off. And we had a conversation about it. Now, look, it's not how we live our lives. We don't, with our children, spend all of our time telling them how bad they are, do we? We actually spend most of our time finding the good in what they do and congratulating them and celebrating that with them. Because what gets rewarded gets repeated. And yet on these types of issues, and I'm not making a specific MSC Oceans point here, more generally on the issues of ethical trade and ethical business, the opposite happens. There's an almost sort of pathological desire to punish. I met, he shall remain nameless, the CEO of Friends of the Earth in my first quarter or two at Sainsbury's. It came about because of something Sainsbury's had been doing in genetic modification. We had a load of people dressed as cows raided our head office and chained themselves to the railings. It was all very exciting. Didn't really feel like that was my day job, but I got stuck in all of it. And he came to see me, and I said to him, I really don't understand why you're picking on me. I actually think I'm one of the good guys. And he said, you are. And I said, now I'm really confused because you think I'm one of the good guys and you'll give me a kicking. He said, that's how it works. He said, what we do is we find the good guys, we give them a kicking, they change, and then we use the pressure of that to make the bad guys change. And I said, don't you think you could just cut us out as a middleman and go straight for the bad guys? He said, no, that never works. So I said, look, you and I are going to struggle to have a strong relationship if that's your mindset. I said, so let's start with what maybe we can agree on. What do you stand for? I said to him. And he literally couldn't answer the question. It was like, for those of you British who know a famous interview on television where a politician was asked the same question 8 times, which he refused to answer. And it was a bit like that. He kept telling me what he was against. And it's no use to me in business to know what you're against. I need to know what you're for. I can do something with what you're for. Businesses do not run adverts that say, we are against healthy eating. They run adverts that say, we are for healthy eating. So we have to make the positive force for change work for us. There's a retailer now retired, may not still be with us actually, I've not kept track of Fergal Quinn of Quinsworth in Ireland. You can probably find him, it's probably predates TED Talks, but I'm sure you can find him online talking. And he has this great line. He was asked about what his job as chief executive is. And he said, I find that most chief executives spend all their life going around finding people who are doing things wrong. He said, my job is to go around finding people doing things right. I loved that. When I heard him say that, I thought, that's the chief executive I want to be. Now, if you ask my partner, my children, they'll say, Dad, that doesn't sound like you a lot of the time. However, going around and finding people doing things right. Brings me to my fourth. How am I doing for time? I'm not doing well. Are we led by consumers? Look, it's a cop-out. Business always says, we will be led by our consumers. But that's just a convenient comfort blanket to wrap themselves in. All great business success starts with businesses stepping way beyond where consumers are now. We don't all have these devices in our pockets that we live our lives around because we kept demanding them for 30 years, and then Steve Jobs said, do you know what? I keep hearing people saying, I want this device that I can do all this stuff on. The really innovative things in our lives come about because people are prepared, businesses and retailers, to step ahead of consumers, take them on the journey. And the way we used to think about this in Sainsbury's was a simple idea. It's a simple idea with a tough articulation, which is that we want to have asked and answered the questions that our consumers are going to ask us in the future. Because that's where trust lies. If when they ask you the question you have no answer, that's a very untrustworthy place to be. If when they ask the question you do, they feel like you have their side. And in that regard, in this space, I think we've made some quite big mistakes because we have communicated with consumers that we've solved problems for them, but we haven't really. If you think about the whole debate about farming of fish versus wild caught, for a long while, consumers thought the solution to the challenges of wild caught was farming, and then they discovered they were doing just as bad things to the oceans having made that switch. They felt, if you like, misled, let down. That's true of line caught as well. You know, for 10 years, we all hid behind little logos that captured the image of an individual fisherman fishing off the quay, catching tuna, apparently, when in fact what we were doing was virtually annihilating albatrosses around the world. And when the consumers came to understand that, they felt that we'd misled and let them down. And these things allow consumers to disengage. They almost force them to disengage. And consumer engagement, as we saw, is one of our big challenges. Which brings me to big and small targets. You have to have big targets, but the problem with big targets is consumers, and actually politicians in good part, disengage from them. You know, who says it's 8 years? And what do you mean by save the ocean? You know, my father, who's still with us, in the 1970s in the oil shock, he worked in the oil industry, and we were all told then oil was going to run out within 20 or 30 years. That would be 20 years ago. And I remember my father saying, for as long as I'm on this planet, there'll be more oil than we know what to do with. And you know, he's still with us, and he was broadly right. And so consumers initially engage with those kind of shock tactics, but they quickly find them out. You do have to have big targets because there's big change needed. They need to be close enough to force action now, but not so close that it's obvious that you can never achieve it. That's the difficult balance. But I'd like to suggest that we have to deal with this problem of hopelessness. When we made the announcement that I mentioned earlier with the MSC, the very first customer letter I got was from someone who I like to think was a retired sergeant major in Tunbridge Wells. And he said, Mr. King, he said, you and I both know that we are going to fish the worlds to extinction. I like skate, and you now won't sell it to me. I wish to eat skate until it's extinct. I'm off to Morrison's. That's why the Morrison's announcement really pissed me off, actually. But you have to remember that consumer's real, and that's the person that you're trying to talk to. Too often we talk to the echo chambers of those that have already got it, who are already on our side. And whilst it's great to have them, it's the 75% who aren't yet there who we have to talk to. And in that regard, it has to be about small changes. There was a book a few years ago, it originated in Australia, came to the UK. It's called Change the World for a Fiver. If you can track down a copy, I encourage you to find it. And I thought it was a brilliant articulation of this problem. Little things that you could do to make a difference to the big issues about which you largely feel you are powerless and hopeless. And we need to think collectively about how we play into that space. So I'm being waved at. That brings me to my conclusion. 4 thoughts, perhaps to start the conversation. Firstly, of course, a business must lead. It's what we do, and we should compete. And the C word that I like is compete. Help us compete. Help the good guys win, because then the good guys do more, and the bad guys have to catch up or they die. Second, in our engagement with government, I think we have to recognise the challenge of that vote every 4 years, the extraordinarily short timeframes that they have, and the desire for them to get everybody else to take those unpalatable decisions, even when they accept that the alternative is disaster. And government, in my experience, can do one thing that only governments can do, and that's create level playing fields. And my ask usually of government is, how can you make this a level playing field on where we and businesses can compete? And how they do that is the one thing governments can do that we can't, is they can legislate to stop things. They can do the difficult negative stuff. And that's the narrative that can often make a big difference to business then being able to compete. Thirdly, we have to change the language. I said that earlier. Those of you that were in the UK, if I said who was the most influential person at the lectern during COVID, pretty much every Brit in this room would say Jonathan Van Tam, I think. See some Brits nodding in the room. He was the Deputy Chief Medical Officer. He found a way of talking about science that engaged the average person in the high street. And I believe he, as an individual, made more difference to how the UK engaged with COVID, rightly or wrongly, than any other person, including the Prime Minister and everybody else that stood at the same lectern. Worth going and having a look, but he used language that allowed people to engage with the issue, and he always created a sense of hope, and he always created a sense that my small change will be part of a bigger idea that will lead to a real and powerful difference. So we need to change the language. And then finally, we need to celebrate success. As I started by saying, we've done some great things. It's nowhere near enough in terms of what we have to do. But celebrating success is what engages consumers. And if it engages consumers, it will engage businesses. And as I started, and hopefully it's clear through everything I've said, if business doesn't take the lead on this, it simply won't happen, in my view. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin King, for that thought-provoking speech. Good morning, everybody. My name is Natasja van den Berg, and I have the honor to be your moderator for the panel discussion. Justin is the first panelist and is already seated, because how are we going to end overfishing in 2030? And how can we save our oceans in only 8 years' time? What necessary steps should we take, and who should take them? That is the topic of today. It's a hybrid event, so that means that there are people here in the room in Barcelona, but there are also people present online from over 65 countries. So a warm welcome also to you who is watching from their homes or offices. As was already mentioned by Paula, at 10:20, I will allow questions and comments from the audience, from you guys. And here in Barcelona, you can do that live by taking a mic, by giving you, if I recognize you or give you the floor, somebody will join you with a microphone. But if you're online, you can ask your question using Slido. If you post your question, a moderator will look at your questions or comments and send them to the stage. So please feel free to share your thoughts or post your questions to the panel. Okay, so in the next 20-25 minutes, we will discuss with the panel, and then with the Q&A, we will continue that conversation on how businesses, governments, scientists, and NGO, who are all present here, all these constituencies in the room, work together to create positive, meaningful change in actually saving the ocean in 8 years. So let me get the panel on stage. The first I'm going to ask to join us on stage, you already saw him. He's the CEO of MSC, Rupert Howes. Please give him a warm welcome to the stage. There.
You want me there? Here?
Yeah, perfect. And then I'm going to ask Minna Epps to join me. She's Director Global Marine and Polar Program of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. A warm welcome to you.
Second one, next to Justin?
No, next to Justin, yes. Okay. And then from Spain, this beautiful country where we are today, José Luis Jauregui, who is the Sustainability Manager of the beautiful fishing company Echebastar. Warm welcome to you, please. And last, but certainly not least, Michaela Reischl. She is the head of CSR at Lidl Spain. Also, a big applause for Michaela Reischl. Thank you, and join us on stage. Yes. So, Justin, thank you so much for kickstarting this conversation. But I thought let's go one step back before we're going to talk about your 4 conclusions. And I was wondering, Minna, since the title of this event is 8 years left to save the ocean, let's go from an environmental perspective. What is the situation of this, how was it called? Mighty ocean. What is the situation from an environmental? Is it that bad? Do we only have 8 years?
Okay, well, thank you very much, and really delighted to be here, so great to be here with all of you. I think, well, since we're a little bit on a British theme here, I kind of start by quoting then Damien Barr by saying that, you know, we're all in the same storm, but we're not necessarily in the same boat. And all of our kind of actions as well that we're taking is creating bigger waves for the more fragile boats. So that's in context. And I think that we don't realize how much we have actually tampered with the chemistry in the ocean. I mean, beyond...
The chemistry, the way it's either acidificated or...
ultimately, the ocean is becoming more sour, warmer, and ultimately breathless.
Exactly.
So we've seen that acidification has increased by 30%. We're seeing deoxygenation in terms of the average oxygen in the ocean, maybe just 2-3% on average, but that has huge implications. And in some areas, it can be 30-40%, very important for high metabolic species like your tunas, etc. They need oxygen. So in a sense, the habitat in the ocean is not visible to the eye, but it's shrinking significantly.
So that is the context this conversation has to be aware of. Mm-hmm. It's really, really, really an urgent situation.
Yes, but we have to have a little bit of ocean optimism inserted in that. And I think that what is it then that we have to do so to stop the decline of ocean health and really restoring the ocean health? So obviously we need to remove the threats. We need to work on building resilience and enhancing recovery, and that rapidly.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go to a person who's actually trying to do that, José Luis Jauregui. You are a company which is MSC certified, and you work quite hard for it. Can you explain why you chose to do that as a fishery company, and how did it come about?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting Echebastar, and well, have the opportunity to make a bit more of knowledge of what we do and who we are. Well, that's a good question, Natasja. And well, if you ask me why, well, we have to go back to maybe mid-2000s when we first started thinking that our activity should go under the sustainability process. Although at that time the fish stocks were not as they are now, we felt that with the ever-increasing effort being done in the oceans, the best way was to create sustainability credentials in the company. That went so far that we decided in 2012 to go under the first attempt for MSC assessment. That attempt failed. Unfortunately, some of the control rules and tools for that fishing activity were not properly addressed in the regional area in the Indian Ocean. And finally, we failed. But that was, even with this failure, we felt more encouraged to keep going with MSC. And in 2016, we decided to go through a new assessment. Mm-hmm. That finally went through, and in November 2018, the company was MSC certified. Yeah. And we are proud to say that Echebastar is the first tuna fishery in the world that has been certified, being one of our main activities, the fat fishery. So here we are, and in a month's time, we will have the third surveillance audit in order to check our deliverables and compliances with the certification and the conditions. Yes. Next year, we will go for the recertification, hopefully, and well, we are happy to say that we are here to not just to get the recertification, but to go even beyond the MSC standards and requirements. So
yeah, I invite everybody in the room to look at your website of your company, because it's like, if you want to understand what MSC is, you should go to your website, actually, because you explain it beautifully. Yeah. And also, really amazing. And you actually invite people to engage in the stakeholder dialogue. So everybody in the room, check out that website. Yeah. It's beautiful. Michaela, 80% of all fish which is sold by Lidl is already certified fish, is sustainable fish. What is your biggest challenge to reach the 100%? Or is that even is that too difficult?
First of all, thank you very much to invite Lidl Spain to present here our commitment on sustainable fisheries. I just was thinking about your question last night, and I remember really well when we started talking about setting a roadmap and goals in Spain for certified fish. And I remember days of discussion with our buyers to set a goal with 35% of certified fish in our assortment till 2017. And it was during a financial crisis. We had a lot of...
You will never reach that, everybody thought.
And the buyer said, Michaela, we never will reach that goal. So I think we have to be ambitious. Now we are on 80% and we are in 22. And we have been several times first mover in Spain with our commitments. Yeah. In fisheries, and also in fish, for example, but also in eggs, milk, and meat. And it was always the same situation, like suppliers didn't want to hear about certification, buyers were concerned about the ambitious goals, but in the end, what we are looking at in Lidl is that we want to make accessible, good and sustainable food for everyone. So what I've heard about during the keynote about competition, we talk here about competition. So our goal is always they're ambitious. And I hope that we set this goal with 100%. I'm as a sustainable manager, I always ask for the 100% because we don't want to make our customers choose between non-certified or certified, sustainable or non-sustainable. This is not an option. No. The option is that we have to offer food with guarantees. Yeah. And this is what we're asking for.
Yeah, that's something Justin King would adhere to, because only 25% of the consumers is actually making the sustainable option at the moment. So 2 leading companies who actually take the role of leading the industry from different positions in the supply chain, both from Spain. That's nice, of course. Rupert, so we're talking about what companies can do, and it's the theme of this entire meeting, of this forum. But what can MSC do to step up? Because it's a major ambition we have to do. What can you do as a certification scheme?
I'm going to start with a profound apology for mucking up so badly all those years ago with Justin and celebrating. So,
finally, he gets his apologies 20 years later.
Thank goodness we're a learning organisation. We're a learning organisation, which is why Justin's here, thank goodness. What can MSC do? What can we all do? MSC is just a tool, a mechanism to connect producers and consumers and engage business to get those incentives right. What we can do is we can scale up what we're doing, and I believe passionately about that. The link to the SDGs is because I, along with many, do feel that they are humanity's best last chance, our route map to a more sustainable and equitable world. 2030, yes, it's a stretch goal. The early SDG targets haven't been met, but I think you need stretch goals. And in fact, it reminds me when Walmart in 2006 made their initial 100% commitment to sourcing from MSC. I can remember chatting with Peter Redman at the time in Bentonville saying, 100%, no, it's too much, you know, it's going to be really impossible to achieve that. He said, no, we need stretch targets so people know we're absolutely serious. So MSC is serious. We want to see all fisheries globally managed on a sustainable basis. Whether they want MSC certification or not is up to them. We're a voluntary program. And therefore, in our next strategic plan, we want to work more to scale up what we're doing, to scale our in-transition to MSC program, where we have 27, I think, pathway projects around the world, where we're working with fisheries in the pre-certification space. And we want to engage more with government, but we might come back to that.
We'll probably do. Let's go to the question we have asked previous to this event. We've asked you people who have said they want to participate either online. 2 questions to kickstart the barriers and lever aspect. And the first thing we asked is, what do you think is the greatest barrier for businesses to be drivers of change in healthy oceans? And regulation was the first biggest barrier as answer, because the bigger the word is, it represents more answers with the same wars, greed, food, IUU fishing. So these 5 associations were the answer. Regulation is the biggest barrier for businesses to be a lever of change. So we come back to that. And the second question we asked is, what do you think is the greatest lever that businesses can employ to help save our ocean? And then you see sustainable sourcing, common interest, but the mirror of the answer which we just had, responsible policy and advocacy. So that's interesting as your answer. So thank you for that. And it gives me an immediate opportunity, actually, to go to that subject, because the barrier is regulation, and the biggest lever is, next to sustainable sourcing, responsible policy and advocacy. So let's go to that, because you were, in your speech, talking about that dance, I would say, between government and business. What is your response to this outcome? I mean, regulation is the biggest barrier for change.
Yeah, well, I guess it's partly how you ask the question.
Okay, of course.
The bit that strikes me on both of those is how infrequently people refer to consumers. Who are infrequently,
yes.
Who are also voters, by the way. It's worth reminding politicians of that sometime. But as I said, you know, the role for government that I see more than anything is level playing field. I think there is a legitimacy in them legislating away the ability to do things. We do that in road safety. We have done that as part of the way that we've fought COVID. So we accept the legitimacy of governments in doing that. It's clearly harder to do that across borders. it's one of the many reasons that Brexit depressed me, because that was a mechanism to do things across borders that no longer exists for us in the UK. But just if I may, to pick up the point, the problem with 80% commitments is that when you make an 80% commitment, everybody thinks they're part of the 20 that doesn't have to do anything. And you know, I remember at M&S when we made a commitment to go only free-range eggs. And I remember a buyer coming to see me, telling me how that was impossible for the products that they were sourcing in Italy, because the Italians didn't care about free-range chickens. And we got to this point where we were almost going to agree that it was a 99% commitment because we couldn't solve the problem in Italy. And then my marketing director came and said, can you please write the advert for me? We're kind to chickens except in Italy.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. So we have to make 100% commitment. So we made 100% commitment, and amazingly, the buyer solved the problem.
Yeah.
And that's why 100% commitments are so important. And there's an old line, a principle isn't a principle unless it costs you money. Yeah. These things need to be painful. And because they're painful, they lead to innovation. And innovation is at the heart of what will change this. We will not solve this problem with the tools that we currently have.
Yes. So back to the question, if the people in the room, which are representing fishery companies, retailers, think that the biggest barrier for change is regulation, you said, okay, it's how you formulate a question. What can businesses do in collaboration with governments to actually get these ambitious targets in place, or actually have the action which we need? Minna, how can businesses and government work together on that? What is the most important thing for that?
Yeah, well, interesting when you mentioned as well that just in terms of competition being the most powerful tool, it could also be a barrier. I mean, if you don't have the right and the amount and the strength in terms of regulation, then actually the competition can have that adverse effect. So I think absolutely, if I would go over to 3 C's, it would be, you know, commitment, collaboration, and coherence. And I think when you talk about businesses...
Without coherence, you cannot have fair competition. Is that,
Right, okay. Well picked up. So I think that basically what we need to do is we talk about seafood sector as a business, but less than 3% of the ocean is free from human activities. It's a very busy place. So you also need to see a lot of cross-sectorial collaboration. You need to manage the ocean as a whole. And I think there is, as you say, the main thing is innovation, and a lot of that comes from businesses, but I think a lot of that innovation would come from collaboration. So I would say that's key. But from a kind of governmental perspective, you know, it's not individual governments. We have to think about multilateralism. We have to manage the ocean like a global common. So I think multilateralism is key. So the governments need to come together and agree on ambitious and adopt ambitious targets, goals, objectives for ocean health and resilience for humankind and ocean kind. And we are on our way in the sense that this is a very big year. It's an important year. We got the the Convention on Biological Diversity, the Global Biodiversity Framework coming up 2020. There is also, for the first time, an internationally legally binding treaty being negotiated under United Nations Convention Law of the Sea. These are a big thing, and we need to set our ambitious target to
because
kind of advance
is fish mentioned in the CBD in the treaty on biodiversity treaty? Is fish in the ocean mentioned there? What?
So at the moment, there is 4 kind of key components to these negotiations. Is looking at environmental impact assessment, because there's no means or mechanism to do that at the moment.
Exactly.
Area-based management tools, so that includes marine protected areas. And this is, again, there's no legal basis to create marine protected areas in the high seas. And there is no institutional mechanism to agree on that. So where does then fishery comes in is saying, well, we've got that taken care of because, you know, we have the regional fisheries management organization, etc. But that's kind of regional. So how do you actually do that at a global level? So I think that's one of the key actually sticking points is some states wants to carve out, carve-outs and opt-outs, and fisheries is one of them. Yeah. And there's also debate whether fisheries is considered marine genetic resources because you'll get into the benefit sharing.
Interesting, because Justin King was mentioning in the Brexit discussion the, well, kind of unbalanced position of the debate on fishery.
Yes.
It's a bit the same in this, it's the same analogy, right? I mean, with discussions on fishery being too big or having a big role in this discussion.
Well, I think it's, you know, for the big fishing nation, I mean, I think they would be more RFMO defensive in the sense that, you know, they would like to have the regionalism, but we still need to manage it on a global scale.
And then the question is, what can they, the other panelists, do for you? I mean, José, I mean, if this is a global discussion, a multilateral political discussion, what can fishery companies like yours, you want to say something?
Yeah, no,
do?
I thought you wanted to answer this question. So what can they do? Yes, but in the end of the day, it comes back to national implementation.
Yes.
And it's not just governments, it's businesses as well.
Of course.
So
on the implementation level, of course, but on the advocacy level, because that was one of the answers in the levers of change. José, are you into politics as a business?
Yeah, well, in principle, we agree with the majority of, well, the reply to the question. But from our company perspective and the volume of our company, it's very difficult to be able to, in some way, interaction for decision-making bodies. But linked with what Minna said, we are submerged with other companies in organizations like SIOT FIP, in which we can bring a bigger volume to the same ocean, and then we are able to, in some way, act before the decisions are made in the regional organizations. So with this perspective, we feel that the political decisions can be achieved if we work together. Of course, competition is a must, because we also agree with Justin that we must be competitive in our activity. We need to compete to be, if not the first of the class. But working together, it makes a big sense for this kind of regulations to come and be in the direction the activity needs.
And do you recognize the sentence of Justin where he says, if a club wants me as a member, I don't want to be in that club?
Fully agree.
Fully agree. Yeah, you recognize it. Rupert, you want to say something?
A couple of thoughts. You cannot have a sustainable business or any sustainable activity in an unsustainable economy. And I think this touches on Justin's point. We need governments, we need leadership, we need a regulatory environment that sets a level playing field that business can then compete with on a level playing field, by definition. MSC is hitting a glass ceiling now. We've grown substantially over 25 years, but we're moving backwards now. Why? Because of the failure of government leadership. We're losing fisheries, 2 million tonnes in the northeast Atlantic. Rich nations cannot agree to share those quotas on a scientific basis.
Yeah, because of course the fish are moving in Nordic direction, right?
Exactly, climate change, north-south. So again, I mean, the existential threat of climate change. We need to internalise those externalities and have them reflected in prices. So what I would say, again, just reflecting some of the earlier comments, business innovates. And I think one of the things Peter Thompson said was, business, by investing in sustainable fishing, by sourcing sustainable seafood, informs government, and maybe will give government the courage they need to set the right playing field rules. And then we have CBOS, which is a great example that I don't have time to discuss now, because I can tell you, moving on.
No, we're going to the Q&A. So I'm going to see already, I'm going to ask, because we're going to go first to the online viewers. If you have a question, please use the Slido deck. Slido and use the Slido code. And you can post your question. Now, we'll get it here online. So we'll wait for the first question to be from Anonymous. How can we do a better job of communicating with consumers the importance of buying sustainable seafood? Yeah, that's about messaging, Justin.
Well, I've spent a career trying to work that out more generally.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm not sure I have the answer. I think I touched on it earlier, which is that too often those that are passionate about a subject, and we share a point of view in large part, I'm sure, in this room, we assume that the audience has the same ear.
Yeah.
And as we saw, the audience in large part doesn't have the same ear. So we have to find a route into those that are not yet converts. We need to be outside of our echo chamber. And there will always be those in extremis who you can't get to. It's the next consumer and the one after them and the one after that you're after. And there has to be, I think, a communication in the space where it feels like my participation as an individual consumer can make a difference.
It was your tip, right? With the fiver, how to change the world with a fiver. You said you need simple, positive action in which you relate your individual action to the bigger cause.
Yeah, exactly that.
I saw a question in the audience. There are 2 mics. Show your hands. 1, 2. Let's see if there is a question here in Barcelona. Still.
We can barely see you, by the way.
Yeah, because it lands, but it's okay. I have a ton of questions, so don't worry. But it's fun if there's somebody there in the audience. Please rise, and somebody will. And I always say, do not give away the mic, but it's fine, it's fine. Yes, sir.
Too late.
Who are you?
I'm Stephen Adolf. I'm writer of the book Tuna Wars, and I'm doing research and advisory in tuna governance. What can business do to get harvest strategies in place in the RFMOs? Because that is one of the most essential things on the agenda.
Harvest. Who do you think the answer who should give the answer?
Maybe Mr.
Jauregui. Well.
Thank you for the question. It is true, we have a lot to do to have the harvest control rules and the tools to be implemented as soon as possible in all the oceans. Maybe you are aware that the Indian Ocean Tuna Commission is working hard in the last years, and some of the harvest control rules are already implemented, and the tools are under discussion with the different CPCs in the area. It's not easy. Many countries, many different type of industry or, say, fishing activities from very basic, artisanal, semi-industrial, industrial, so many different years. And establishing harvest control tools is a difficult task, believe me, it's not easy.
Why is it difficult?
Because of what I said, it's
so many different
perspectives, so many
so
different
getting agreement with
fishing
these
segments, so many differences that putting all these things together is not easy.
Okay.
But it's going well. I'm very optimistic in this point.
You get 1 word as a response. Not agree. No. Yeah. 1 word.
Thank you. 1 word. It's also very political.
Yes, of course.
We should put it in the governments who are at the negotiation table in the RFMOs.
And then we get, again, the discussion between the relationship between governments and businesses, because this panel, and what they can do to influence governments and policies. Yes. Let me see. Yeah, there is a question over there. Can we also get a new question from the online audience if they have it already? But we can first go to Barcelona. Who are you?
Thank you very much. My name is Iris Siegler from Shark Project. And I would just want to follow up on the presentation which I saw. And I looked at the slide with the consumer survey you did.
Yeah.
And maybe others also noted that like at accidental catch, which is bycatch, ranked pretty low in the concerns of people. And I would be really interested in, like, maybe Rupert, you can address that, or Jauregui. Why? I mean, we all know this is one of the biggest problems we have. Why is it so low?
Yeah, that's always a good question. Why for all these, but it were all big problems. But what do you think is the consumer preference on what is the biggest issue?
I'll try and respond.
You didn't ask them.
And I think that survey actually asked what the key issues were, and it came up with overfishing, pollution, climate change, and that one was lower down. I guess a lot of consumers don't really know or understand where their products are coming from, whether it's terrestrial, farmed, wild.
So it's knowledge.
It's knowledge, yeah. Okay. And we're back to communicating with consumers.
Yes. So agree? Yeah.
One of the biggest problems is people are not aware how much bycatch, how much damage is done, and it's not just a target fish.
So
That's, I
it's
think,
knowledge
what I really want to
problem.
highlight.
Thank you for that. Yeah, we had a question from the online community. What should we do to make fishers more willing to participate in sustainability? What is the key conversation you will have with the companies you buy your fish from to actually do or go to more sustainable practices?
I think the first thing is that we in our businesses know very well our supply chain. You know, this seems that everyone knows perfectly who are your producers.
Are you aware of your supply chain?
We are really doing a risk analysis of all our supply chain, and in Lidl we sell everything. We reach to sell also boats. So you can imagine how this is complex.
Everybody who was in Lidl knows how many products you sell.
How many products, not only always permanently, but a lot of food action. So you can imagine how difficult it is to know or to get to the producer. But here in Spain, we did really a good work with Laura together. And this comes also to communication, how you can combine your good practices or your best practices also to reach the consumers and much more stakeholders. We did a project on the anchovies, which were not able to be fished during 5 years in the Cantabrico because there were no fish anymore, basically on that. So MSC did a huge work with the Habers over there in El Baskenland, Países Vascos. So what we did, we took several journalists and we made a journey and to show them what we did with a supplier from us. A supplier from us, he were suffering on, of course, of this ban and of the fishing of anchovy. So 200 people, they could not work anymore.
Yeah.
So we built up this whole storytelling about how they could enter again to work.
Exactly.
And we showed also the fishers, not only the big suppliers and then the agents and the many are behind of the labels. So what we did, we went there, we talked directly to the fishers, and they also, all of them, we were with Laura on a boat the whole day, and he told us that it was so necessary that we, all the fishers of this port, work together on MSC, and not only to get back to have this wonderful product in our assortment.
They realized they had a shared interest before competition to have a healthy.
And you know what? First of all, we could just sell this anchovy during Christmas.
Yeah.
4 months in the year. Now it's permanently in our assortment. So this is just an example how you can involve everyone, but you have to have the storytelling. What is not communicated does not exist. So your commitment didn't know anyone because you didn't communicate, so it doesn't exist. So
somebody else didn't communicate, as I remembered correctly. If you don't communicate in business, it doesn't exist. Rupert?
Just to add, that question's disappeared, but if you switch the word make to incentivize, how do we incentivize fisheries to become sustainable, or whatever the wording was? That's exactly what MSC was set up to do. Through the power of business, the power of the seafood businesses that enter the program, the fisheries, the retailers, to bring that in. But then you still need government to create an enabling, leveling environment.
Yeah. Let's go to a final question from the audience. I saw, a person over there.
Hi, Luis Burillon. Used to work for MSC for many years, and I'm now coordinating a collective action platform for sustainable fisheries and aquaculture in Mexico. And I was really intrigued by Justin's presentation about competition versus collaboration. And there is a lot of talking about pre-competitive collaboration in many forums and many projects. So Is that feasible on
Yeah.
your view?
So
Could
it's
you
a good
elaborate
question.
a little more on this competition versus
Yeah.
collaboration?
So just stop any form of pre-competitive collaboration. Is that the consequence of your position?
No, but I mean, I was trying to sort of bifurcate the question deliberately to create a debate. Both have a role. Of course they do. It's important to remember, by the way, I can't tell you how many conversations I've sat in that if they hadn't been stopped by lawyers, would have broken the law. I mean, the law in most of the developed world places very significant constraints on what collaboration is even legal.
Yes.
And
but that's political regulation, right?
That's political regulation, and there are good consumer reasons for that, of course. And if I may sort of segue back to that previous question, which is, we shouldn't assume that awareness solves this problem, and we shouldn't assume that the kind of moral high ground allows us to behave in a way that the law actually doesn't. And my point about asking the questions and answering them before the consumer knows, even to ask the question, is the point I was trying to make, which is, if you take bycatch as an issue, I think it'll be a long way in the future before the consumer really gets that. We need David Attenborough to really go to work on it to stand a chance of consumer awareness. But if we made our decisions today on the basis that at some point in time we're going to have to explain to consumers why we didn't sort that issue, we would treat it, it's a dirty secret which will really hurt this industry when consumers properly understand it.
Yeah.
So why don't we actually sort it before we're forced to by the consumers that we represent?
Yeah, that's the main issue actually of the conclusion of this debate, this forum, right? Don't wait for politics, start already, but also understand the importance of the dynamics between good regulation and business and play a role in that. Don't wait for consumers, but know that when they are catching up, you have to comply or explain why you did or didn't do something. Yeah. So you have to be much more aware of the dynamics. That is, I think, your main message.
But just on that if I could just close on that pre-competition, which is the one thing I think pre-competition can do, is take politicians' ready-baked answers.
Yes.
The ability of industries, of sectors, to go to politicians saying broadly, this is what we could agree on, if you could legislate for it.
Please do so.
They really like that, politicians, as a whole.
Put something in the market as a minimum requirement. We already agree upon this. Create this level playing field for us, please.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, we're going to go to the last minutes of this event, because everybody, of course, needs it's a party, it's an expo, and everybody has meetings the entire day, probably. There's also a booth of MSC and ASC where you can ask your questions or go have debates or meetings, or if you want to be certified, please do so. And there is, of course, also a drink, a refreshment at 5, ASC happy hour. So please, if you want to talk to them, please do that. So let me just finish off this event by asking all panelists a very simple question. Before you started getting on this stage, you probably had one sentence you really wanted to say to get to this audience. I mean, this is my main message. And perhaps because of the dynamics of this conversation, you had no opportunity to raise the issue. So final thoughts as a closing of this panel. Rupert.
Gosh, I thought I was going to go last. Final thoughts.
Can do that.
I think keep the faith is what I would say. I think Peter Thompson's video really did indicate the pressures the oceans are under. We didn't talk about the population dynamic here. I find it incredible. It took modern humans 200,000 years to get to the first billion in 1820, 3 billion when I was born in the 1960s, and we're heading to 8 billion now confirmed this year. So my point is we've got to do everything quickly and fast and try and meet these deadlines.
I was so happy that a sustainability event I host wasn't mentioning overpopulation, but we did.
Consumption.
Good.
Well, last thought. I think that we in businesses, we have to change our mind. We have to be part of the solution. We have to go away to being part of the problem. We have to stick to our goals.
Yeah, even if the context now
even
is
if
really dire.
You know what, the context is always difficult.
Yeah.
You know, but the thing is, it won't getting better if you're just waiting.
Yeah.
So I think join us on this journey to a better tomorrow, everyone, and make our businesses more sustainable, because we have seen on several examples that we can really give this impulse, this push, and to change the situation.
Yeah, well, 8 years to go. We have time. So my message again, as a fishing company, industrial fishing company, always under the critics of some stakeholders, again, we are openly inviting all of you to participate in our project. It's very interesting. It's amazing. In this sense, I would like also to include, of course, Ms. Seigler. We have some a long time ago relationship, and SAC project will be again most welcome to participate in our process.
Yeah.
So please join us, help us in doing things better, and this will make possibly that in 8 years' time we have a different scenario.
Very good. It's an invitation to make it really a joint effort,
yes.
Right? I mean, we have to do it together.
Thank you.
Minna.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think we need to be bold, visionary, but also pragmatic. I mean, we need to remain to be pragmatic in terms of really trying to adopt systematic, strategic, collaborative process and to make sure that we can identify the common interest and avoid competition, I would say. So, I mean, this obviously, international policymaking takes a long time. It's slow. And again, I really think it's for businesses to come together. We need a joint ocean business strategy and leverage, because if you have your radar out, you can see what's coming, step up. And I don't think that we are, I think consumers are definitely onto it, specifically the bycatch. So I think it just needs to only step up effort. I don't think no longer it's secrets.
Also an invitation to do this together, because otherwise it won't work. Yeah. Final words for Justin King, please.
Oh, I don't know. I'm a capitalist, so risk capital is, I think, the most powerful force for change on the planet, and risk capital pursues competitive advantage and profit, and unleashing risk capital is the most powerful force that we can unleash on this problem.
Wow. A panel with a diverse perspective on the questions. What is the power of business as a lever for change? We only have 8 years. We need everybody here in the room to step up. Probably you do already amazing things. I see this on this expo. I invite you all at 5 for the drinks at the ASC booth. And if you want to have a conversation, you can go to the stand 4A401. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you from all over the world, from China to watch online. Thank you for joining this forum.